Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Bella Rose.
Well, if you have been married for any amount of time, I'm sure the title resonates with you, How to Receive the Love You Desire, because we've all had experiences where you think you've dropped 1,000 hints, you've shared stories of friends that have had wonderful experiences, and you assume that that meant something to your spouse, and later to find out he didn't even know what you were talking about, or it didn't even strike a chord. So today we're really talking about the nitty-gritty, how to receive that love that you desire. Because truly, each of us desire specific things. And if we don't do the hard work of figuring out what it is we desire specifically, and then translating that into a way that our spouse can comprehend and how that makes sense to him, we won't be able to receive what we desire. So I'm talking to Kimberly Rae. She's an amazing woman, has an amazing story, and she's talking about practically how to understand your husband, how to understand yourself, and how together, those two understandings, you can make a strategy for a much more loving, fulfilling marriage for yourself. But it does take some work. And so we're going to find out today the tools that you'll need to have, the understandings you'll need to discover, and how you can help your partner work with you in loving him and him loving you, and how that connects together. So let's go ahead and dive in and understand this very important concepts. Hi there and welcome, Delight Your Marriage listener. I'm really excited that you're here with me today. I have a wonderful conversation planned with Miss Kimberly Rae, or I guess it's Mrs. Kimberly Rae, from KimberlyRae.com. Welcome, Kimberly. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So would you go ahead and introduce yourself a bit and tell us a little bit about your day-to-day life?
Okay. There is no such thing as a normal day, which is probably the same for most wives and moms.
Yes.
I am an author. We used to be in missions, so we've lived overseas. Before I got married, I lived in Bangladesh for a couple of years, in Uganda, and then after I got married, we were in Kosovo and Indonesia for a while. And we were actually planning on staying there long term. It was a very fascinating place to be. It was a great culture and stuff. We got to eat fish heads and snake. And
Oh my gosh.
when our baby was born, he was the only white, blue-eyed, bald baby in town. So we turned into celebrities, and they told us to rub honey on his head to make his hair grow. It was great. But, I got diagnosed with Addison's disease, and we had to come back to the States permanently. And for a while, I really felt like God had shut me down. And then I realized he wasn't shutting us down. He was setting us aside for something totally different. And as usual, it was something better and something that I needed to learn. For me personally, it was that I needed to learn to stop trying to find my significance in what I did. And so being sick and stuck was a really good lesson in learning to find my significance in Jesus Christ alone. And then after that time, when I was ready, he got me started with writing. It was my way of staying in missions and staying connected to overseas. And I write novels about human trafficking and missions. And it's kind of my way of taking people on missions trips without having to go on the plane and jet lag. And then you don't have to eat the fish heads. And we now have 2 kids. One's 11 and one is 7. I'm actually homeschooling them this year, which was a totally new challenge.
Wow.
And let's see what else. I go around speaking and training people on how to fight human trafficking. And sometimes I speak about living joyfully with chronic illness. And sometimes I still speak about missions. And sometimes I can't speak because I'm sick. So
Oh, wow.
my daily life is run with a 3-hour schedule of pills and a specific diet and trying to figure out which symptom goes with which sickness. Because I also have asthma and hypermobility syndrome and scoliosis and a cyst on my brain.
Oh my
it's a
gosh.
juggling act. And for those of you with chronic illness, which I hear is about 1 out of every 2 people, you know what it's like to have your day limited and to wish you could do more. And again, the Lord is teaching me all the time to stop trying to find my worth and how much I do, but just to be in charge. And so it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be afflicted, that we might learn his statutes. So I'm trying to learn to submit in this area, as in many others. That I can trade my life with anybody.
Wow, that is so powerful. And can you share a little bit about Addison's disease?
Yeah, it's a very rare disease. Most people, if they know about it, it's because of JFK. He had it. It means your adrenal glands don't work right. And your adrenal glands produce cortisol, which is a hormone that affects like every cell in your body. So obviously, if they don't work, that's a big problem. Today, about 100 years ago, if you got it, you pretty much just died. But we have steroids that can replace the cortisol. So I am steroid dependent for the rest of my life. And not this kind of steroids that make you buff, the kind of steroids that make you poopy. So I take those every day. And then the problem is, though, your body is adapting cortisol like every 20 seconds. And it's the hormone that they call it the stress hormone, but it's basically the hormone that helps you deal with change. And so when you're in traffic, your cortisol levels rise. When you're sick, your cortisol levels rise. When you're in conflict, they rise. When the temperature changes, everything like that. So if I get sick, I have to adapt my medicine accordingly. So you're always trying to figure out, go up, go down, and then withdrawal down. And, it's really, really interesting learning to figure out how to live with it. But I remember when I first got the disease and I was reading on it, it's kind of like, am I just overreacting? Is it really not that big of a deal? And I read this test they did on rats, and they took out the rats' adrenal glands. And as long as absolutely everything in their little world stayed the same number of rats in the cage, same temperature, same food every single day, they were okay. But if they changed one single thing, even like 1 degree of temperature, the rats dropped dead.
Oh my goodness.
Pretty validating. I guess it is kind of serious. So I have to wear a little emergency bracelet, and I have to take an emergency shot with me in case I get in a wreck or something. So it's quite dramatic, it impresses people. if you like that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's an everyday, constant consideration for you.
Yes, every day, all day long.
Wow. Well, tell us a little bit about your personality, a little bit about your husband's personality, if you could.
I am the balloon and he's the brick. My mom always used to say every balloon needs one, and I'm the one who's more emotional and romantic and creative and colorful, and he is very stable and consistent, and he's exactly what I need, because I float around and he holds me to the ground. And like all marriages, probably the very things that you need and that you appreciate so much are also some of the things that drive you crazy.
Yes.
Have these big discussions on, are there 12 colors or are there hundreds of colors? And we know we're both right, but it's one thing that's interesting about the two of us is I'm a writer and he hates to read. He always has. And I find that very ironic. And I used to think, what in the world, but it's actually turned out for good, because he doesn't enjoy reading, but he doesn't mind listening. So whenever I write a book, I read it out loud to him, which is a great editing way for us writers. But then that way, he always is the first one to get every single thing I write. So it's turned out for good.
I love that. Well, I think that's definitely maturity, and it's obvious in your attitude and the ways you've described everything that you've gone through in your life, is that the things that seem to be most challenging, the things that on face value seem like they are a curse versus a blessing, when we have some perspective, we have some life experience, some attitude shifts, we can see that God is working it together for good anyway, even without us necessarily recognizing it.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, so I want to hear, I'm so interested in so much of what you've shared already, but would you tell us a story of a difficult season or struggle in your marriage? And you know what, before we go into that, because this entire podcast is really about inspiring and empowering wives with inspirational stories and stories that teach us about life and love and God and how he works in all of those areas, is there a scripture or a quote that has meant a lot to you over the years?
Yeah, right before we got married, a dear elderly lady in our church, she gave us a wedding card. And at the bottom, there was a quote that I loved so much, I actually framed it and put it on our wall. And it said, each for the other and both for God.
Wow.
And that really struck me because I didn't get married till I was 28 and he was 27. And, you have all these ideas of what marriage is supposed to be, but that really struck me, that triangle concept of the closer you are to God, the closer you'll be to each other, and making your marriage about the other person and about the Lord instead of about yourself, which is, of course, we all get into marriage thinking of ourselves probably more than anybody else. And we stay in marriage thinking about ourselves more than anybody else. And that reminds me, this is not just about me. This is something that is eternal, and it's meant to be a representation of Jesus Christ, and it can't be that way if I'm being selfish.
That is so wise. I love that. Yep. Awesome. Well, can you share about a difficult season in your marriage?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would be the difficult season in our marriage. When I got married, I had all these I wanted our marriage to be not just a good marriage. I wanted a great marriage. I wanted our marriage to be one of those way up there that people could look at, and it was all that it was supposed to be, and it was full of romance and full of passion, and we were always working on it and making it a priority. And over the years, because I felt that way, I pushed for my goal, which I thought was godly. And let's read this book, let's do this thing, let's have a date night. The book says this, we need to do this, and we need to try this. And my husband is very much like I said, he's stable and consistent, which means he's not terribly motivated. So let's do all these extra things that are going to take extra effort. And being a guy, he's like, that I'm going to fail anyway. So, I would push and prod and probably nag and whine, and it wasn't making things better. And I thought the problem was him. He didn't care as much about our marriage. He wasn't prioritizing our marriage. God, what is the problem? You need to fix him. And over the years, of course, I pushed harder, and usually pushing just makes the person back off instead of coming closer. So our marriage was still good, but it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't good enough. And so I kept trying, and I'd try this, and that didn't work. So I'd try something else, and that didn't work. And I tried something else, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't figure out the magic button, And finally, it came down to, I was explaining to him, this is what I want our marriage to be. Don't you want our marriage to be this way? And he honestly came out and said no. And we realized what he wanted for our marriage was he wanted pleasantness. Now, to me, as an author, I love words. Pleasant is right up there with nice. He likes nice. And when he would say, you look nice, I'm like, I'm going to go change my outfit because I look terrible, because nice is just boring and bland. And, he wanted a nice marriage. He wanted a pleasant marriage. He wanted a friendly marriage, and I'm thinking, passion and romance and all these wonderful things. And to me, that was devastating. It sounds silly. I know there's women all over the world that would give anything for a husband that treated them nicely. And so I kind of kicked and screamed internally and emotionally and with God. And there was this one day, how when you finally get to the point where you're willing to listen to the still small voice, you actually stop talking so much and God has something to say. And God said, do you want a happy marriage? And it was like, well, of course I want a happy marriage. That's what all this is about. And he was like, no, do you want a happy marriage? Because basically he was offering me a happy marriage. And I had to recognize that, no, I didn't want a happy marriage if it meant giving up my idea of a happy marriage. And so in the end, I had to realize it wasn't that I was prioritizing our marriage. I was prioritizing me. And was I willing to give up me? And then I would have a happy marriage. The misery wasn't the marriage. The misery was me. And I tell my kids, you're only as miserable as you choose to be, but I wasn't listening. And to finally give that up, it had to be more of a submission to God than anything else. But in Ephesians, it talks about submitting to your husband as unto the Lord. It's really not about submitting to him. It's about submitting to Jesus Christ. And the amazing thing is, as it always is, when we finally give up and let God have what he wants, he very often gives us the thing that we wanted in the first place. And I realized that having a pleasant marriage is actually really nice. I finally gave up the pushing and prodding. My husband started doing some of the things that I wanted him to do, but before he wouldn't, because he would fail, he would forget, and it just wasn't going to work. And now he can do them in freedom because there's not all this huge expectation around it. And I appreciate the stuff that he does do instead of saying, well, that's not good enough, or that's not, how we do sometimes, just hinting or just by the way we respond. they know that didn't work. And men have a tendency to be drawn toward things that they succeed at. And so the more you let them know they're failing, the more they're less likely to do what you want them to do in the first place. And so that would be our struggle, I think, was just that I had this ideal that I was not willing to give up. And when I finally gave it to God, kind of like being healthy, you know, if I'm healthy, I can serve God more. If I'm healthy, I can do this. And if you keep saying that and never accept this is where I'm at, this is what God's given me, you can't have joy. Because contentment is letting God be in charge of your life, basically, and what he's given you and being thankful. And now that I have chosen that, I have a wonderful marriage. I have a wonderful husband, and now I can appreciate all the amazing things that he does do instead of picking that one thing that he didn't do that I really wanted him to do and jumping on that and living there. You know what I mean? It's like there's a puddle, and you go and you sit in it and wallow in it when there was all this good stuff elsewhere if you would just get out of your puddle.
Yes, get out of your puddle.
And
yep.
Just recently, actually, the scriptures really kind of hit that home with me. That verse that talks about teach the young women to love their husbands and love their children.
Yes.
Well, of course, I love my husband and love my children. And somebody was saying, you know, there's different words for love in the scriptures. There's the agape love, which is the unconditional Christ-like love, and there's the eros love, which is the passionate kind of sexual love, and then there's the friendship love, phileo, and that's the friendship love. And they were saying what it literally means is like, what did they say? It's like snuggly love. And that really struck me because my husband is very affectionate and he's the snuggly type, and I'm not. I'm the let's go, let's do, let's, you know, sit and stare in each other's eyes and say important things or something. And like teach the young women to be affectionate and friendly with their husbands. My husband needs a friendly life more than he needs his fireworks, whatever I want it to be. And it's like, if I'm willing to be what he needs, our marriage will be right because that's the way God intended it.
So tell us how this developed. So did this happen over a course of a couple of years, or what's the timeline here?
More like 12. It was kind of a come and go. You know, I'd push and prod and try and figure something out, and then I'd submit for a while, and then I'd think, ooh, I got another idea. Let's try this. And I'd push and prod, and I'm ashamed of myself that it took me this long. But I'm a doer. I'm a fixer. And so whenever things would feel stagnant, it's like, oh, I'm going to fix it. And I'm learning, instead of fixing it by, hey, if we do this, or hey, if you do this, how about it's more like, hey, what if I do the first good thing? What if I do the first kind thing? What if I plan something instead of waiting for him to initiate whatever it is that I think that I want? There was one time a few years ago, just after our second baby was born, and she was only 2 months old, and he was leaving the country to go back to Indonesia to teach at a conference there. So he's translating curriculum. He's doing this work. He's planning things. And guys are single-focused. God made them to be that way. But I was thinking in the back of my mind, okay, he's leaving me with a brand new baby. And so, of course, he's planning some kind of special something before he goes for me, you know, to encourage me. And stupid me, I get these ideas, and then I jump in them and pursue them and make them a big thing when he wasn't even thinking of that. He was thinking of translation. So the closer I got to the date, the more I thought, you know, I bet he's going to get me some flowers so that while he's gone, I can see them and think of them and know that he loves me. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, that's so nice. And he's not telling me because he's going to surprise me. And and then it did occur to me, you know what? I've done this before, and it didn't work. And then you get upset, and the whole time he's gone, you think, I wish I had some flowers, and he didn't give me any flowers, and, you know, he wasn't even thinking about me. And I thought, you know what? I can do that and be miserable, or I can fix this problem myself. So I actually went out and I bought myself flowers, and I came home to the house, and I saw him in the kitchen, and I handed them to him, and I said, please give these to me and say, when I'm gone, when you see these, remember that I love you. You should have seen the look on his face. He was kind of like, am I in trouble? And this doesn't sound like a good idea, and I don't know. And so he said that, and I'm like, no, really, it's okay. I want you to say this. And so finally he handed me the flowers, and he said it, you know, all chagrined, and we laughed. But the great thing was, I put those flowers on the table, and when I saw them, I smiled, and I thought, you know, he really does love me, and it was perfect. It was wonderful. Yeah. And I thought, you know, if I hadn't done that, I would have sat in my puddle
Yeah.
when he was doing what God asked him to do, he wasn't doing anything wrong. I had just made up this whole thing in my head. And so I'm learning, fix the problem yourself. If there's something you need, either express it very clearly because they're direct people. Don't hint. Yeah. If you want some flowers, say, you know what, could you buy me some flowers? And okay, it's less romantic, but it's way better than nothing.
Yep. Yep. I love that. So it almost seems like, some people might listen to this and be like, well, so I've got to change everything about me in order to just, make this a peaceful union with him. And it's not like, that's not at all what you're saying. It sounds like what you're saying is to be the person that's proactive and say, first of all, identify what is it that I need to be happy, to enjoy my marriage. Okay, I need flowers every once in a while. So let's be proactive and take the first step and buy the flowers and do that. I remember a good friend of mine, actually she listens to the podcast, so hopefully she'll listen in on this one. But she told me I was having just years of Valentine's stress and like birthday stress and Christmas. I mean, every holiday I was stressed because it came upon the heels of many holidays where I didn't feel like I was cherished or loved, or it almost felt like he had forgotten the holiday, or because my husband works on holidays and it stresses him out to buy things anyway. Cause like you said, if a husband thinks that he's not going to succeed, he probably is going to try to avoid it. Yep. So anyway, so I had gotten all this pressure that Valentine's Day, it was this Valentine's Day, was approaching. And my friend was like, well, she had previously told me, if you want him to do things, you're going to have to, tell him very clearly X, Y, and Z, this is what I need. Or even what she and her husband have done is they've made a list for each other of gifts they'd like to receive from the other person.
Good.
Yeah. So I feel like that's a very proactive step. So you know that you're going to receive a gift that's something you'll like. And then at some point, it's a surprise that you'll get it at some point, which I think is very nice. But anyway, so this Valentine's Day, what ended up happening was she really encouraged me to let all those other times go and forgive them and forgive my husband for them. And I hadn't even realized that that's what was happening, that I was holding all this stuff against my husband that, he hadn't delivered on. And I kind of grumbled as she was telling me this and was like, well, I don't really need to forgive. I mean, clearly I'm fine. I only do the podcast. I clearly know everything I should. Anyway, it was so good. That's exactly what I needed to do. It took me a couple days, but I was able to really talk to God about it and really, really let it go. And meanwhile, I had given my husband the indication that I wanted to celebrate Valentine's Day. Of course, he was working, but in a couple of days after that. And he had taken it upon himself to ask some people at work some ideas about gifts and that kind of thing. And he ended up giving me a very, very thoughtful gift that I never had even imagined that I would have wanted, which is a Fitbit. I don't know if anyone has Fitbits out there, but I love it. So anyway, the moral of my story there was that there was some proactivity there, but there was also just a lot of forgiveness and like being willing to just receive whatever it was, whether it was nothing or something. And like you said, like, let it go. Like the flower thing, let it go, give him the flowers, tell him what you want him to say. And maybe the next time he will realize that there's flowers would be helpful and give it to you. But if not, you're okay.
Yes. It's like giving them the chance to succeed instead of setting them up for failure from the start. We women are notorious for that. I'm expecting this, and you're not going to do it. I know you're not going to do it, and then I'm going to be upset. And it's like, where's the room for them to succeed in there?
Yes.
Yeah, we actually have gotten to where we tell each other what we want typically because, like, for him, I love giving creative gifts. He's a gadget guy. I am so technologically challenged. I know everything. And it's like, if I buy something, it's going to be the wrong thing, and I already know it, So I've finally given up on that whole spontaneous, surprise me, whatever. And it's like, and he gets really stressed at the idea of trying to buy something sentimental and meaningful because he wants to buy me something practical. And, I don't want a screwdriver, And so, yeah, that's not, just let it go. They're another species. Then just recognize that. If you want a good gift, be a secret sister with a girl, It's just, I think that's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I think it's so true. Well, it takes a while to get there. And I feel like it probably is on a lot of people's hearts. And I'm sure it was on yours for the 12 or so years. I mean, I'm still obviously dealing with it myself, but what about those of us that are like, okay, well, if I just let him off the hook, I'm not going to get anything I want, gift wise, physical touch wise, whatever their love language is. I don't know if listeners are familiar with the love languages. You love it, you said?
Yeah. And that's another thing, like what you were saying, your husband may not like to give you gifts, but he's going to work every day. And I tried my husband's love language is acts of service, which is so ironic because when we studied what love languages were meaningful to me, all 4 of them except the acts of service were meaningful. And I was like, oh, God, But I'm trying to learn to recognize the gift of that, If I'm not feeling well, I need the acts of service more than I need the other things. And maybe the other things are missing, but he's only got so much to give. And if he's giving something, I need to recognize the love in that. He took out the trash. Thank God that he took out the trash because if he didn't, that would be bad, And he goes to work for our family and, he'll do these things. And so maybe it's not flowers, but it can mean just as much if I recognize the love behind it. One thing for me, but I love what you were saying about be very direct and say exactly what you'd like. I always thought, well, it's not worth as much if you have to say so. He's a guy. You have to say so. And I remember a couple of Valentine's days where I asked him, I'm an author. I love memories, and he's not good at remembering things. So, when I just sit down, tell me about a time when when you first fell in love with me or something, he's kind of like, gives the deer in the headlights look like, are you kidding? So I asked him one time for a gift, for our Valentine's gift, and we go out to dinner, and I want you to tell me the story of when we got engaged. And I took my paper, and he told the story, and I wrote it down. And it's really precious to me, but it's not something he would have ever thought to do because he wouldn't think it would be meaningful, It's a set of screwdrivers, but it was very special to me, but that never would have happened if I hadn't come out and said, this is exactly what I want. And I'm learning. We're all learning. And I think that's another thing that's really important for women to recognize is that it's not about getting to this point of now our marriage is exactly as it should be. And we are here. The whole point of marriage is to grow to be more like Jesus Christ. And so the struggle in and of itself is a good thing. Because it's sandpapering all of our rough edges. It's iron sharpening iron. It is molding us to be more like God's son. And if that means, for a while we're kicking and screaming because we don't want to submit, when we finally do, we've grown. If we aren't learning something and then we are learning something, we've grown. If anything's better than it was before, we have grown, and that's the purpose. So that is succeeding. So it's not about I'm not there until everything's just right. It's, okay, what do I need to do right now to make it a little bit better? And that is growth, and that's good. So just like with our kids, when they're 2, you expect them to fall down a lot, and you expect certain things of them, but when they're 5, you expect more of them, and when they're 10, So I think God looks at our marriages the same way. We're going to screw up a lot in the beginning, and over time we should be growing and changing and being willing to learn how best to work with this other person instead of trying to turn them into a mirror image of ourselves.
Yes, I love that. Well, and we've talked a lot about love languages, and that's actually, just for those that aren't familiar, it's so funny because every time I spend more time on the love language, I've known about love languages, the book. There's a book, and then there's a number of books about it, but there's the original book. I'll have it all linked up in the show notes at delightyourmarriage.com. But just to give a primer, there's 5 love languages. I've known about them since high school, but every single time I either spend time reading the book or talking about it with a friend or taking the test again, I'm edified. I'm grown in learning how to love others better. So the idea is that we each love, we either receive love or give love in one of 5 ways. We've got some primary ways. So you might have 1 or 2 that are at the very top, and you can take a test. Again, I'll have that linked up, that you can figure out what your specific love language is that you like to receive and give love. But the 5 are spending time together, acts of service, like you mentioned, your husband is. My husband is that too, is his primary. Words of affirmation is one. Is that yours? Is that your top one?
I'm a writer.
There you go. Me too. Words of affirmation are huge for me as well. The other one is physical touch. And then the last one, which one am I missing? Gifts. There we go. That's the one we were kind of talking about. Yep. So anyway, I suggest that you take the test. If you can, encourage your husband to take the test too, so you can understand who he is. But if you can't, if for some reason you're not able to ask him to take it, or he's not really interested in that, whatever, you can probably figure it out just by clues of thinking through when he wants to show love to you, what does he often do? And so a lot of us would point immediately to sex. Sometimes that's like the first thing that we think of, because we're like, well, he always wants sex. And he very well could have physical touch as his top one. But a lot of times the book clarified this for me. I really liked it. But it said that if you have kind of a consistent physical sexual intimacy in your marriage already, then the husband or wife or whatever can kind of relax into that consistency and then think through like what love language might be primary in addition to that. So, like I said, like physical touch might very well be their number one, but if it's not, it might just be that they're really desiring physical intimacy because that's something that might be lacking in the marriage. And if that's not there, then he might not be able to think of anything other than that until it's at like a good, standard, whatever that is for your marriage, whatever the consistency is or the frequency is for you guys that works well. And then you can kind of explore what's on top of that. So the example that the book had was like, if your wife disrespected you all the time and said all these mean things to you and criticized you all the time, would you even want to have sex with her? And he's like, absolutely not. And so that kind of revealed that, his primary is actually words of affirmation, even though he's not feeling like he had the sexual intimacy part there. So anyway, there's just some interesting things you can kind of think through in your own marriage. But was there anything you wanted to add to that, like talk about love language?
Well, it makes me think, like, if you're trying to figure out your husband's, it's like if you were in the hospital and you couldn't do anything for him, and what would he most likely do for you if he wanted to encourage you? Would he bring you a card? Would he give you a gift? Would he come and sit with you? Would he hold your hand? And so there are the different things. And I have found that I found really fascinating is that my love languages are different with my husband than they are with the rest of the world. I think that's really cool. Because, like, for example, the touch, I remember he was talking about a lot of that is affectionate touch, like non-sexual touching, the hugging and the rubbing and the holding hands and stuff. I am not a touchy person in regular life. I'm very uncomfortable with it. My husband, I am a very touchy person, and that surprised me. It was kind of like, oh my goodness, I never knew this about myself. So I love that he's my exception. There is a part of love that is just his that isn't for the rest of the world. And I think that's neat. So even when you're looking at your husband, I remember this woman on Facebook. I'm on a couple of groups that are chronic illness, and she's like in chronic pain, and she got on and she was so upset and devastated because she's like, I live with pain every day and I have this terrible time and whatever. And I guess one of her friends got on Facebook and said she had the flu, and her husband posted, I'm sorry, I hope you feel better, which was a thing to do. But she's like, he's never posted that on any of my posts. He never says that for me, and I'm so miserable. And it was just like, you could see this, I'm desperately needing some words of affirmation, and he gave it to somebody else. But it made me wonder, what is he doing for her? Or is he just totally burnt out, because she expects so much? Or, it's just really hard to say. And I tried to explain to her, well, the girl with the flu is going to get better. He doesn't want to say to you, I hope you get better, because he knows you're not going to get better. And that would discourage you even more. And so, maybe he doesn't know what to say. And, it goes back to being direct and really opening up. So it's probably not that he hates her, he's ignoring her. He just doesn't know what to do.
Yes.
So that has really been helpful. The love languages was huge because I remember, like, with my dad, I didn't feel very loved because he wasn't an affectionate person and he wasn't a verbal person. He's a Navy officer. And as I was reading that book, it was like, all these light bulbs came on. He paid for things. He would buy us things. He would, provide for us, and he would work hard. And when things got stressful, instead of spending time with us, he would work harder. And I realized, oh my goodness, I was very, very loved, and I just didn't realize it. So yeah, it's a great book. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I totally would. And I think there's another step here that it's interesting. My church's leadership team just went through a meeting where we all took the test again and had a conversation about it afterwards. And it was really nice because we ended up doing this where we took the test, and then we read out each of the love languages and had people raise their hands as to what love language was their primary one. And it's funny because, you know, some of them I could have told them that. I could, you know, when they raised their hand, I was like, oh yeah, definitely they're, you know, physical touch, or they're definitely words, because they're always so encouraging and that kind of thing. But then it was so funny because there were a lot of the people were physical touch as their primary love language. And I would never have thought that. And I'm kind of touchy. Like I'm kind of like, I welcome hugs, and I'm happy to give hugs, you know, that kind of thing. But I find it interesting that a lot of us don't know how to operate in our own love language effectively so that we receive it consistently like we need it, like the woman that you spoke about, or that we can give it in a way that is welcome to others. So I think about physical touch as one that we all need, probably, unless you had a very like touchy family that was very comfortable in that and had like a good way of handling social situations with touch involved. I feel like that, and pretty much every single one of them, we need some guidance on. Do you think so?
I totally agree. And just to learn how to exercise them correctly, sometimes we don't even know what would feed us. And
yeah,
we're trying to do these other things because we see other people doing them. And it's like, kind of like within the body of Christ. This is how to serve the Lord. I have to do what so-and-so does. And he always gives people notes of encouragement. And so you sit there with your note, and it's a blank piece of paper, and you're totally lost. And you think, I am not a good Christian. It's like, well, God gave you something else to do. Don't worry about it. You know, what is your thing? Maybe you're the one who sits next to the person who's devastated and grieving, and you just sit there quietly. That is a gift. Most of us cannot do that. I am so uncomfortable with silence, and so I fill it with sometimes stupid things.
I hear that.
Gift, you know, or, you know, maybe you're the one who leaves the flowers and you go away, and that's what they need, you know, and it's like, stop comparing yourself to everybody else. Figure out what it is that you can do, that what you naturally do is a gift from God as a gift to others. That's your way of being his hands and feet. And again, it's one of those things, just practice, give it a try. And just like a little kid learning to walk, you're not going to do it great at first, or find somebody else in your church that's good at it and watch them or follow them or even ask them. I mean, what a compliment. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. And so if somebody came up to me and said, you're so good at being encouraging, how can I be like that? I'd be so honored. You know, that'd be just a gift to me. So you're right. We do need to learn. And that's where I think the church is missing. You know, the Bible talks about the older women teaching the younger women. We don't have that very much. The mentoring and the really helping. How do you love your husband? How do you love your kids? That's why I love this podcast, because that's exactly what it's doing. It's helping the older women teach the younger women, and not older as in we're all like 80, but just somebody who's a step ahead, you know, can say, okay, this is a step you can take, and that'll help. So I know my husband knows I need words. And so it's like, buying me a card is not something he would think to do. And I used to want that and want that. Except, you know, when he's good at it. But he bought this little set of Post-it notes in the shape of those little like balloons, talking balloons, you know, it's just a tiny note that he can do. And so in the morning, he'll see that little note, and he can write on a little tiny note. It's not like he has to write a big, long, flowery, whatever. He can just say a little something. He left me one this morning. It was so sweet. And it just filled me up. But I never would have thought, okay, if he's not good at buying cards, buy him a thing of Post-it notes. You know, it just wouldn't have crossed my mind. So, you know, again, telling them what you need, maybe they need to find their own way of being able to meet it. And again, they're going to mess up too. And that's what I did wrong, was when he would try something and it wasn't what I really needed, I would give him the feeling that he failed. You know, you didn't come out and say, oh, you did this wrong. Oh, this wasn't worth anything. But if you criticize or if you react negatively, they're going to go the other direction. Whereas if you wouldn't do that with your kids, you know, if they're learning to ride a bike or if they're learning to do something new, you know, they're not going to do it right at first. And so you encourage them more. So with our husbands, we need to learn, you know, if they tried, that's huge. You know, if nothing else, really encourage the fact that they tried and appreciate it. And then maybe you can give a tiny little hint, not like a list of 17 things. Next time, do it this way. But one thing, just one. Next time, could you blah, 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 blah. And yay.
Yep. And I would even encourage that the thank you and the next time be miles apart. So maybe,
maybe thinking, okay, thank you, but, you know.
You're all right.
Skip the big butt. No big butts.
Right, right.
Or I remember reading about the sandwich principle once, that whenever you want to give instructions or, a criticism or whatever, sandwich it in between two good things. You start with the good thing. I appreciate so much, da-da-da-da-da. Maybe next time you can whatever, but I just want you to know, da-da-da-da-da, so that they go away feeling affirmed and that you recognize what they did. It's very important for men to know you recognize what they did that was good. Instead of always recognizing what they did that was wrong. I mean, everybody's that way. None of us really want to be beat over the head with what we're screwing up on.
That's so true. And I love the idea of thinking it through as though you were teaching your kids. Like, how would you teach them something new? You would absolutely be focused on the good, focused on what they did that you loved. And yeah, I would, if I were you, the way that I kind of do it is that because my husband is acts of service, and when he'll do something for me, I'll just be so grateful in the moment. And then later, maybe the next day, or when it crosses my mind and we're in a really emotionally good place later, I might say, I love that you did that. And I'd also love if this happened as well, and it kind of gives him in the moment a lot of positive support. And then later to be thinking about it critically, like, oh, we could even include some words in that interaction or something like that.
Yeah.
And like you said, the times when he does give that amazingly wonderful listening ear and is really encouraging with his words, that really means a lot to me. That's what I will absolutely in the moment be so encouraging of and grateful for, and tell him how much I feel loved by that. And that teaches us. And I think so. To kind of summarize this section of our interview is, first of all, it matters to know yourself and to know what you're needing and what it means for you, what these certain kinds of love languages means to you. Again, please take that test, because you need to kind of get a handle on why you're desiring these things and what they are. And the second thing is understanding your husband, right? That's vital to understand what he feels loved by. How is he showing you love already, even though maybe you're not feeling it? And then lastly, basically get some strategy around it. Learn how to love better in his love language. Learn how to teach him in a good way what your love language is, and have these conversations. So maybe it's worth letting him listen to this podcast with you and try to talk through these things. Do you have anything to add, Kimberly?
Yeah, two things. One would be, men are shoulder-to-shoulder people typically, not always. We women are face-to-face. So a lot of times what's meaningful to us is, let's sit at the table and let's have a talk about this. And the guy's feeling like he just got called into the principal's office. I have found
That's good.
The best way for us to grow together would be like if we're in the car and we're listening to a podcast on the radio or audiobook. Audiobooks are awesome. Because you can be listening, you can stop it, you can talk and everything, but it's not like, hey, let's sit down and read a book and, really focus on this. That makes them scared a lot of times. He's like, let's sit down and we're going to talk about my new gadget, and be like, oh my goodness, I'm so overwhelmed. And the other thing is that it's very important not to give off this idea that men are stupid. Oh, we have to tell them everything and we have to spell it all out and what's the matter with them and they're so whatever. That's poison to your marriage. And I hate this whole thing about our culture that we can just beat men up all the time. That's wrong. It's ungodly. Christian women should never be doing that. We should never be making fun of our husbands, and that's okay. But when we lived overseas, it was such a great experience because every culture is different. In every country we lived, there's a different culture. And you get so used to the different one that I remember when we first came home, and it's like, I don't know how to behave in this setting anymore because I don't remember how this works. And in the other culture, you recognize there's different things that are important to them than are important to me. And, as within missions, it's like the last thing you want to do is go over and be like, hey, my way of doing things is this, 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 and this, and you're not doing them right, and blah, blah, blah. That's totally not the way to share the gospel or, make friends. The best way is you start asking questions about them. Who are they? What do they care about? What's important to them? How does this work? And you find out the most amazing things, and you find out even sometimes what they're doing that you thought was rude and inconsiderate and whatever, totally wasn't. Like in Indonesia, for example, if you're sitting at the dinner table and you ask somebody to pass the potatoes, that is totally rude. You're asking them to stop eating to give you something. What you're supposed to do is reach across from them and grab the potatoes for yourself.
Wow.
And so, the two people might be trying to be kind, and they're actually, the other person's thinking they're totally rude, whereas a little bit of communication would have fixed the problem entirely because you're thinking in a different way. And God made men and women to think in a different way, so we need to get to know them. So one of the things we can do, like with the love language, isn't, hey, I took this test and I found out my love language is this, and now you need to do all these things for me. It's find out about his. Hey, I heard about this thing where there's these love languages and different ways people show love. If you were in the hospital, what would you want me to do? I'm totally curious about you. And typically when a person feels validated that way and feels listened to, they reciprocate. You ask them questions, they ask you questions back. It's just a natural thing. Whereas you push, they're going to push back. You criticize, they're going to criticize back. It's just a real simple thing. It's like a ping pong match. So be the first positive, and in the cultures that we lived in, I finally learned pretty much every time there was something that felt rude or inconsiderate or unloving, I would start telling myself there's something about this that I don't know. And sometimes I'd find out right away. Sometimes I wouldn't find out for months. But whenever I did find out, yep, there was something I didn't know. And understanding made it that they weren't doing anything inconsiderate. There was a total reason that I did not understand. That has helped so much with like everybody,
Yes.
Assuming all these things. Just assume we don't know everything, which, I think we have that down.
You would think. Oh, I love that. There's something about this I don't know. What a wonderful reminder, and something that when you start to feel yourself getting frustrated or concerned or sad even, like a lot of times it's just something you don't know. That's awesome. Well, I hope that you have been inspired to take the high road, to take the first step, to be intentional about finding out who you are, what you need to feel loved, and then figure out, strategize, literally take a pen and paper and strategize how to receive that love. And yes, go for it. Ask for advice. Something we're doing pretty soon in our leadership meeting I mentioned is that we are actually, you can do this in your church or with a small group or whatever, but we've selected people in our group that are specially capable and competent in particular love languages. And then we are interviewing them about how it works. So just simple questions like, questions that you might have about gift giving, for example. How do you like to receive gifts? How do you know that someone likes a particular type of gift? How do you give a gift in a good way? Those kinds of things. Let's say that's the topic we're talking about is gifts, right? But then all of the other 5. So go for it. Ask for advice. Find someone who's really good at giving and receiving time. Let's say that's their top love language, and just ask them some questions. Just take them out for coffee and be like, I'd love to pick your brain on this. And yeah, they might have never thought about it before, but if they are really adept at their love language, I'm sure they have strategies that they would love to share them with you. So yes, go for it. Know who you are. Find out what he is. Strategize and learn. That's what this is about. So go to delightyourmarriage.com/93. There's a link there for the love languages test or the quiz. It doesn't take very long, very easy to fill out, but it's so insightful. It's very worth your time. And listen, if this episode has been helpful to you, would you think of one person that you could forward this on to just to share these insights that might be life-giving and totally transformational for someone's marriage? Who knows what you could spark just by sharing this episode? Well, God bless you. I'm praying for you. I'm going to talk to you next Tuesday. Kimberly Rae is back to talk about chronic illness and what that means in marriage and how we all can learn from it. There's really significant insights that I just can't wait to share with you. We'll talk then. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Stop by delightyourmarriage.com to check out all the show notes, as well as many more resources and articles. Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.